Water is right there behind you.
Thank you so much.
Please state your name for the record.
Vanessa Cormalot, Kormylo.
Cormalot, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please tell the jury a little bit about what you do for a living?
I'm a practicing family law attorney, mostly in Greenville County. I've been practicing 28 years, predominantly in family law. Handle some closings, but mostly family law, representing litigants, and also representing children in court when I serve as guardian ad litem.
What is a guardian ad litem?
That is an advocate for the child who's appointed in family court cases when there are issues involving the children, such as visitation issues or custody issues. A guardian's appointed. It's typically an attorney, but sometimes we have some non-attorneys that are awesome, and so that's just part of our system. When a case involves a child, we do an investigation. We're kind of an arm of the court, and we report back our findings to the judge.
And how are you involved in this case, the state against Zachary Hughes?
In the case against Zachary Hughes, I came into a little bit of this case because I was the guardian ad litem for the child of the mother who was murdered.
Of Christina Parcell?
Yes.
And Ida Melo?
Yes.
Okay. When were you appointed the guardian ad litem of Ida Melo?
In October of 2020.
How old was Ida when you were appointed?
I believe she was 8.
So, getting a little bit into this, as guardian ad litem, are you responsible for communicating with the father and the mother of the child?
Yes, I typically start with the parents, the parties. We talk to third parties, go visit the child at the school, of course, talk to the child a good bit. And then by the time we get to court, I would have investigated and talked to way more people, and I prepare a written report before the trial.
So in October of 2020, where was Ida Melo?
She was in Italy.
Okay. So were you able to contact her while she was over there?
I had her father's email address, and Mr. Melo and I would email back and forth. He did not necessarily cooperate in allowing me to speak with him or the child. There was one time I was going to get to speak with her. He wanted to script my questions, and I didn't want to put her in an uncomfortable position, so I waited to meet her until she came back.
So I think you touched on it, but by what method would you communicate with Mr. Melo?
Email only.
Okay. Was Ida Melo ever eventually returned to the United States?
Yes, in April of 2021, the Hague Convention, the international body that helps enforce different custody rulings, ordered that Ida return to South Carolina, and then the mother was awarded custody here by agreement.
Okay. So, once Ada had returned to South Carolina, what developed as far as that custody dynamic, specifically with regard to your role?
So the parents were in contested custody litigation. The mother wanted Ida to stay here, of course, with her. Mr. Melo was in Italy, and I think there were some criminal charges that he was working through before he could return here. So they were just in what I would consider very highly contested litigation. Mr. Melo regularly emailed me, and he was a very difficult litigant to manage.
So speaking to this particular dispute, was this the first time? But let me back up. Was it your role upon being appointed guardian ad litem to investigate a little bit into the history between the custody dynamic?
Yes, typically I'll speak to the prior guardian ad litem if there was an older case. In this case, sadly, the parents had been fighting since Ida was 3. So there were several cases, Greenville County and Pickens, and I was able to talk to the prior guardian ad litem and increasingly grew concerned about Mr. Melo.
So you said you communicated with Mr. Melo through email. Was that primarily the method of communication, or like the only method of communication?
It was the only method of communication except one phone call I had with him.
Okay. So, over the course of your role as guardian ad litem, approximately how many emails did you exchange with Mr. Melo?
I don't even know if I could count them. I know when we printed them for the family court trial, I think it was 3 or 4 reams of paper.
So, also in the course of once Ida returns from Italy, did Mr. Melo continue to communicate with you?
Yes, he was continuing to communicate, harass, threaten, intimidate, bully. His communications were unlike anything I've ever encountered as a guardian, and so they continued to escalate, and I was pretty concerned.
So not getting into the specifics of maybe some of the things that he messaged you, but what kind of, when you say threats and harassment, what kinds of things was he conveying to you?
He would tell me that I always needed to be looking over my shoulder, that he was coming after my license, that I was going to get arrested for criminal charges or civil charges, that I was definitely going to jail. He mentioned my children to me by name with specific information about them at one visitation I had with him. He put terrible things on the internet about me, including my office address and phone number. He actually included my husband in his posts. He said awful things, that we were trafficking children, Ukrainian children, through Spartanburg. That's like on the internet. It was Facebook and Reddit, and at one point he had said I was manufacturing child pornography in my law office and put my address and my phone number right there. So he was definitely fired up.
And once you assumed this role and this line of communication began, did you receive similar types of emails from, let's say, third parties?
Yes, I would start receiving emails early on, not just from Mr. Melo, but from other people on his behalf, multiple different, one was an attorney, one was a private investigator, allegedly, one was a saint, one was, they were just multiple people that would email me from different addresses with very similar threats and characterizations of me and the litigation. And they would definitely be arguing on behalf of Mr. Melo.
Would you attempt to follow up with these individuals when they reached out to you?
Yes, I would typically try and return an email, try and find out who the sender was, try and verify if they were real. We had suspicions that many of them were Mr. Melo himself. Because of the way the emails were worded, he used a lot of the same phrasing. He writes in a very unusual manner using capitals at different times and has absolutely terrible spelling. So we could see a lot of similarities in these third-party emails, which caused us to believe they were likely him. And then, like for instance, if an attorney emailed me and I couldn't find that attorney anywhere, or a private investigator emailed me and I never could find that private investigator, I really was left with the only conclusion that it was likely Mr. Melo.
So, going into October, or let me back up a little bit. So, as this developed, with you in the role as guardian ad litem, what findings did you make as to the lengths that Mr. Melo would go to get custody back of Ida?
He was very clear that there was nothing off limits. He was, like I said, threatening, harassing, intimidating, and he was consistently doing it, these hundreds and hundreds of emails. Sometimes he was represented by attorneys, sometimes he was not, and this was the worst case I've ever worked on as far as representing a child's interest, but at the same time having a parent act like that. It came to the point even early on. I think in May of 2021, I brought a motion to the court as the child's guardian, asking for a psychological evaluation of him and asking that the mother be allowed to end phone calls if the child was uncomfortable.
While you were guardian ad litem, did you ever receive some, let's just say, suspect envelopes in the mail?
Yes?
If I showed you that envelope, would you recognize it?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's marked as State's Exhibit 158. Is that the envelope or a envelope you received?
Yes. This is addressed to me at my office on Washington Street. It is dated July 8th of 2021, and it came from Knoxville, Tennessee. Per the mail carrier, the return address references a P.O. box here in Greenville, which we later learned belonged to Brad Post.
Okay. You said Knoxville, Tennessee?
Yes, sir.
Did you see the date that it was postmarked?
July, and I think it was 2021.
Okay. July 8th, sound right?
Yes. Sorry.
That's all right. Not getting into the specifics, and I realize it's unpleasant, but generally, what were the contents of this envelope?
They involved pictures of Christina Parcell in various states of undress. One included a male anatomy body part in one of the pictures. They were basically pornographic in nature. Yes.
What did you do after receiving this envelope?
I called law enforcement.
Okay. Did you submit it to them, to your knowledge?
I did.
Okay. Was that the only envelope you received?
No.
Do you know, when did you receive another?
I think it was about a month later. We received another envelope from Knoxville, Tennessee, with the same P.O. box return address. So this time we actually just called law enforcement to come get the envelope rather than opening it.
And in the context of what you've testified to, would sending something like this be in line with John Melo's actions in the custody dispute?
Yes, this would be in line with also what he emailed, how he conducted himself. He was determined to discredit and disparage and ruin the reputation and character of the mother. He was in a custody battle, so he was determined for her to be thought of in a certain light and hopefully be determined to be unfit.
So at the time you received these, let's say in July and August of 2021, what is the posture of the custody dispute?
We were just moving right along. I think I'd had the motion for him to have a psychological evaluation. The mother had custody at that time. Of course, even though I had reason to be concerned about Mr. Melo and how he conducted himself, I also had a duty to investigate the allegations he was making against the mother. And I did that to the best of my ability. I've never done this before, but I actually hired a private investigator to look into things for me. I tried to find out if there was anything true about the allegations he was making, because this little girl was in that woman's home. And her interests were my duty. So I tried my best to interview people, research, work with the private investigator, and that my duty is ongoing and through the end of the trial. So that's what I had to do. Of course, I talked to the mother about the pictures and determined they were very old and in a consensual setting. So I did look into these things. I didn't just write them off because he was, so unstable.
You mentioned accusations that John Melo would make. Would he accuse Ms. Parcell of using drugs?
He did. That was a large part of his concern about her. So, at least as guardians, we can investigate that fairly easily. We asked her to take I think even more drug screens to see if she was actually using drugs. And since she was living with her sister at the time, we asked her to be drug screened. They were in the same home with the child. I think at one point the child was even drug tested in a corresponding case. So we did investigate that. We found no evidence of any drug use in the testing. And the private investigator also did not see any type of dealing in and out of the home.
Had you been asked to make the recommendation, would you have recommended Ida to stay with Christina Parcell?
Yes. So in family court, we're actually not allowed to make recommendations to the court unless we're asked by a judge. And I know you just asked me, but yes, my position was in visiting her in school and talking to her teacher. She was thriving here. She was doing so well in her mother's custody, living with her aunt. They had Taco Tuesdays, and anyway, she loved sushi and avocado, and she was just living a very full life. When I visited, she was riding bikes with the neighbor kids, making friendships, and doing so well. So at the time, yes, that would have been my recommendation if we had gone to trial before the mother's murder.
So at the time of the murder, would John Melo have been aware of any reports or recommendations that would have been negatively oriented towards him?
He would definitely have been aware of my motion to have him psychologically evaluated. He would be aware of my concerns about him through our hundreds, if not thousands, of emails back and forth. I don't hold back when I'm the guardian, so if he's making allegations and I'm asking him, please substantiate these. If you're going to accuse the mother of this, please give me substantiation and I will investigate this. If he says neighbors are watching something, please give me the neighbors' names. I have the ability as guardian to bring a motion before the court to have her removed if the court has substantiation of the concerns. And he would just play games and tell me he couldn't give me the names of the witnesses he knew about because he needed to save them when he sued me in civil litigation. And so he was very aware that I was not a fan of how he conducted himself. If you're worried about a child enough to make substantial allegations, and this guardian is appointed only for her interests, please work with me. Even if we had differences, set them aside, help me help your child. And he was definitely not cooperative.
So before the murder on October 13th, 2021, when was the last time that Mr. Melo saw Ida?
Prior to the murder?
Prior to the murder.
He would have seen her last in Italy when Christina, the mother, flew over to get her per the Hague order and fly her home. So I think he had seen her there in Italy. To my knowledge, he had not returned to our country until after the murder.
So that would have been April of 2021?
Yes.
Is there any significance in the time span from April to October of 2021 with regard to the positioning of the parties?
Well, in family court, we really look at how often you see your child. Are you supporting your child financially? And we have a mechanism in family court statutory that says if you don't visit your child willfully for 6 months, and if you don't pay child support for your child for a period of 6 months, your rights can actually be terminated if the court determines that's in the child's best interests. So a lot of parents are pretty sensitive to the 6-month mark.
In October was that 6-month mark? Is that correct?
That would be right.
Do you know who the defendant is?
I'm familiar with his face, yes. I don't think I've ever met him in person.
Let's say prior to October 13th of 2021, did you know who he was?
So when you're a guardian ad litem, both parents give you lists of character witnesses they would like you to interview in relation to their case. And so the first time I saw Mr. Hughes' name would have been May of 2021. And I received that through Mr. Melo's attorney at the time, as he was on a list of character witnesses to interview, for me to interview on behalf of Mr. Melo.
Did he take any actions with regard to the custody situation? I'm speaking of Mr. Hughes. Did he take any actions with regard to the custody situation after the murder?
After the murder, I'm not sure of.
Okay.
Before the murder, he prepared an affidavit
Okay.
to support Mr. Melo regaining custody of his daughter. And he also worked with local attorneys, helping Mr. Melo procure representation and in that line.
I'm going to show you what is State's Exhibit 164. I'm showing you State's Exhibit 164.
Yes, this is the affidavit he prepared for court. He prepared it in September of 2021, September 21st, which we thought was unusual because there was nothing pending at that particular time. And then in October after the murder, we were in court for a hearing about where Ida would live after her mom was murdered, and this affidavit was used in that motion.
Your Honor, this time the State would move into evidence State's Exhibit 164.
No objection. Exhibit 64 comes in.
Thank you, Judge. So I want to clarify this timeline here. So in September of 2021, what purpose would this affidavit have in the custody dispute? Or was there a place for this affidavit in the custody dispute to be needed?
Okay, so in family court, trials involve live testimony like today. Hearings involve affidavits, which are just sworn statements, that are notarized. So we prepare them in relation to motions that we file. To my knowledge, there was no motion pending at the time that affidavit was prepared.
Okay. And this was filed October 22nd of 2021.
Right. And at that time, of course, after the murder, we all kind of filed what we could, because you have a mother who's been murdered, a child who doesn't have her mom, and her dad's in Italy. And so her placement in custody was in question.
So it's only 9 days after the murder that this is filed.
Correct. And we were back in court dealing with Aida's placement at that time.
I want to go back briefly. Speaking of these emails you received from third parties, what were some of those parties? Were those individuals, purported individuals, that you could recall?
There was an attorney named Sophia Carlucci. There was an investigator. The email said Mullins Investigations. There was a saint. I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember. It was a saint somebody. There was a guy who wrote me as a biker dude. with this particular experience he wanted to share with me. And then there was a Mitch Rubin. I don't know what profession he was, but he actually emailed one of our judges in our case, and that's not acceptable.
So, specifically, you said Mullen Investigations. You received emails from this
Yes.
entity? Did you try to identify who that was?
Sure. I searched on the internet, tried to find any investigations, any investigator named Mullins, company named Mullins Investigations.
Any success there?
I could not find them.
Okay. Was Sophia Carlucci one of these individuals that reached out to you?
Yes, she was very involved with helping Mr. Mello.
And on looking at these emails that you received specifically from Sophia Carlucci, did you notice anything peculiar about any of those emails that helped identify who might have sent them?
Sure. As attorneys, we kind of have a bad rap, but we try to actually be civil toward one another for the most part. She was not civil in any way. She's never met me. She's writing these hateful communications, very insulting, very similar to Mr. Mello's tone. And a lot of times some of the phraseology would be identical to how Mr. Mello would address me and email me. I tried, and sometimes I would try to see if the sheriff's office could help with tracking the emails, but if they were from proton.com or there were other ways, we could never really seem to trace them, and I'm not really good at that computer forensic stuff, but I could never find the source of the emails. But my suspicion was a lot of them seemed to talk a lot like Mr. Mello.
Did he ever mistakenly send one from one of those, send an email from
Yes,
one of
there was an email one time from Sophia Carlucci, from John, I think, in Sophia Carlucci's email. So it's like he was emailing me, but he used Sophia Carlucci's name and information.
Thank you. I have no further questions for you.
All right, cross-exam. Yeah, really, Fritz. Sure.
I'm going to ask you to step out. I have a matter I need to take up with the attorneys.
Here we go.
All right, Mr. Mormon.
Thank you. I'm going to thank the court. Mr. Cormalot, just a few questions.
It's gonna be short.
On direct examination, you testified, I believe that as part of your job as a guardian ad litem was to familiarize yourself with the course of litigation and prior cases. Is that correct?
Yes.
Isn't it true that based on your review of the history of the case and the litigation, there had been at least 3 prior cases. Is that correct?
Yes, that sounds right.
And isn't it true that in each of the cases, Christina Parcell agreed to give John Melo custody? Isn't that true?
That's my understanding.
You were asked a little bit about John Melo and Ida being in Italy. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And as part of your duties as the guardian ad litem during this period, was it your obligation to familiarize yourself just a little bit with what was going on with the litigation in Italy?
With the Hague Convention?
And just in general terms, what the status was of the litigation and what the outcome was?
Yes, I was following that. Yes.
Based on your interaction with Christina during this period, what was your understanding as to who was financing the litigation in Italy?
I'm not sure. I know her sister was helping. I think she bought the plane tickets. I don't think she had an attorney. I think she was self-representing or whatever you do with the Hague Convention. But
Did you also think it was possible that Mr. Post was financing the litigation?
maybe part of the family court litigation, maybe. But as far as being in Italy and that part, he may have paid for bodyguards while she was there. I think I heard something about that, but I don't know for sure, and I don't want to misspeak.
Understand. But you think he was helping finance the litigation in the States?
Possibly. I've definitely heard that.
Your Honor, I don't have anything else. We would ask Ms. Cormalot to remain under subpoena and be available.
Okay. Any redirect?
Nothing from the state.
Okay. You may step down.
Thank you.
Quick witness.
No, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to thank you again. Sometimes I have to ask you to step out just because I have certain matters that I need to take up with the attorneys, and if you weren't here, I wouldn't do it. You know, so, or if you were in here, I would not be able to get into all those details. And I just, again, want to thank you. I told you I sound like a broken record, but again, I just can't stress how important it is that you are prohibited from watching any TV coverage, any type of news, and just for the integrity of this trial, justice and fairness to the defendant and the state, that you're only to consider the evidence that comes in through this courtroom, and again, not to discuss it among yourselves or anybody, okay? We will be back at 9:30 in the morning, and again, I'm so grateful for each and every one of you for your service.